Thank you, Mike. Tiffany and I have been so honored to work with you, Ellen, and so many of the folks here in advancing the issue of road safety in the Permian Basin. It's been a pleasure connecting you with agency and legislative officials in Austin to talk about the meaningful impact that a regional, data-driven approach to road safety can have. I've been asked this afternoon to give a political update on the upcoming election and a policy outlook on the 89th Texas legislative session, which will begin in January. I'm glad you've all had a chance to have a little bit of your meal. I hope not to make you sick here in the second half of the conversation, because we've got some crazy things to talk about and work through on both of those topics. So let's just take a moment and think about why exactly we're here this afternoon. The Permian Basin is among the top 5 oil and natural gas producing regions in the world, representing 4% of global oil production, 40% of U.S. oil production, and 15% of domestic natural gas production. The Permian Basin is a key strategic national asset for the United States and critical to the world economy. In fact, having seen how control of oil and gas can be wielded by dictators and despots around the world, it's not an understatement to say that the Permian Basin is critical to preserving freedom and liberty around the globe. Closer to home, the Permian Basin is vital for the Texas economy. It supports more than 200,000 jobs while generating over 10.8% of Texas's gross domestic product. As this energy sector continues to grow, so too does the amount of traffic on the roadways, causing congestion, crashes, and fatalities. Now we're going to get into a little bit about the national politics and the election outlook, and we'll talk about the legislative session. But our national politics is so unsettled and unpredictable. With a presidential race that has had so many twists and turns and surprises, and changing out nominees, the assassination attempts, to weird conspiracy theories, to over-the-top antics, I think that maybe the best analogy that we can come up with is the Texas weather. And that is that if you don't like it, wait a few minutes and it'll change. So early voting for the November 5th general election couldn't begin soon enough, and it began on Monday of this week and goes through November 1st. Nationally, the presidential race remains very tight, with a focus on a few states along the southern East Coast, the Rust Belt, and southwestern United States. In Texas, former President Trump has consistently led, polling by around 6% and outside of the margin of error. So we don't see Texas as in play in the presidential race. Neither Trump nor Harris have broadly campaigned here, really have only focused on Texas for fundraising to support their efforts and messaging in other states. Although I did just see earlier this week that Vice President Harris is planning a rally this Friday in Houston. On the U.S. Senate race featuring Ted Cruz and Congressman Colin Allred, the race is much tighter. Polls show Cruz with a slight lead between 1% and 4%. And I don't know about you all, but I'll be happy when all the commercials about Cancun and abortion and men playing women's sports no longer interrupt our news, our weekend football, Dancing with the Stars, or whatever your show of choice is. One of the few congressional competitive races in the state is a rematch along the border between Vicente Gonzalez and Maya Flores. Flores won the special election in July 2022 and briefly represented the district. Gonzalez represented a neighboring district. But during the redrawing and redistricting in 2020, he was drawn into the 34th district, which was more competitive for Republicans. He beat Flores in the 22 general election by 8.5 percentage points. But this race is going to be one of the ones closest to watch in the U.S. as both major political parties seek control of the U.S. House. And it's part of an effort by Republicans to win more Hispanic voters who've traditionally dominated the efforts in South Texas. At the statewide level, one seat on the Railroad Commission is on the ballot. That's incumbent Republican Christy Craddock, who has served on the commission since 2012. She faces 3 opponents: Democrat Catherine Colbert, Libertarian Hawk Dunlap, and Green Party candidate Eddie Espinoza. Craddock is running on her strong record of leading the state's oil and gas regulator with a balanced approach. Her opponents are campaigning to provide more transparency into the commission's actions and stronger enforcement of regulations. 3 Republican incumbent Texas Supreme Court justices are up for re-election: Jimmy Blacklock, John Devine, and Jane Bland, and all face Democratic opposition that are trying to use the state's near total abortion ban as a way to appeal to voters. At the state legislative level, both the 150-member Texas House and the 31-member Texas Senate are expected to remain under GOP control. The Senate has 3 races worth discussing. With the election of John Whitmire as mayor of Houston, the Senate lost its longest-serving Democrat and its longest-serving member. He was replaced by Senator Molly Cook, a Democrat and emergency room nurse. In addition to the replacement of Senator Whitmire, voters have the responsibility this year to fill the seat of retiring GOP Senator Drew Springer from Munster. In that contest, GOP nominee Brent Hagenbu faces Democrat Dale Fry. That Senate seat is in a very GOP-leaning district. And it's interesting from our perspective here at the Road Safety Luncheon to note that the likely winner, Brent Hagenbu, is a trucking and transportation logistics owner from the Denton area. In South Texas, the GOP nominee, Adam Hinojosa, is again pitted against freshman Democrat Senator Morgan LaMantia in what may be the most expensive legislative race of the cycle. In 2022, LaMantia won that race over Hinojosa by just 659 votes. So as you leave here today, one of the things I want to emphasize is how important it is to go vote. Take advantage of the early vote period, take advantage of Election Day, but it is incredibly important that you show up and exercise your choice. In the Texas House, the GOP currently enjoys an 86 to 63 majority with 1 vacancy. Like the Senate, the House is expected to remain under GOP control for the next legislature. This comes after a pretty brutal primary season largely related to Governor Abbott's push for school choice last year. That effort stalled in the House in November due to the opposition of 21 GOP House members. Of those 21 GOP House members, some retired, many were from rural and suburban districts, but only 7 survived the primary. Several other GOP House incumbents who hadn't supported school choice lost their re-election bids as well. And only 1 Democrat lost in her primary to a more progressive candidate. So what that means for our purposes is the House GOP caucus will likely be much further right and populist during this next legislative session, and the House Democratic caucus remains firmly, if not slightly further left than before. With all 150 seats on the November 5th ballot, all eyes are now on how much the partisan makeup of the House will change, and then ultimately on the House leadership election. There are about 8 seats in play in the Texas House. 3 open seats, and 2 of those are currently held by Democrats, 1 by the GOP. 4 seats that are held by the GOP in marginal districts, and 1 seat that's held by a Democratic incumbent. That Democratic incumbent, by the way, is Representative Eddie Morales, whose district is southwest of here along the Texas border. So after it's all said and done on November 5th, the GOP could be looking at no change in its majority, or I would say a flip of 1 seat up or down in regards to it, but no major shift in regards to the balance of power in the Texas House. But before the votes are even counted on the 5th, we've been watching a contested race for the leadership of the Texas House unfold. The incumbent speaker, Dade Phelan, survived a strong challenge in his primary in his Southeast Texas district. Currently, his speakership is being challenged by fellow Republican David Cook and Dallas Democrat Ana Maria Ramos. Once the November 5th results are in, you can expect the speaker's race to heat up as candidates will work to get 76-plus votes to be able to lead the House in 2025. And so that kind of sets the stage for what we're going to come into in this legislative session. The legislature is going to convene for its 89th regular session at noon on January 14th, 2025. In line with the state constitution, legislators will have 140 days to conduct the state's legislative business for their 2-year terms. I'm sure you've seen the news coverage and likely seen the campaign ads that have been focused on public education and school choice. Governor Abbott has indicated his intent to make that an emergency item, which means the legislature can debate and consider the bill within 60 days of its convening. Lieutenant Governor Patrick has said that school choice should be the first bill passed. So coupled with that legislation will likely be additional funding for schools and teacher pay raises and other public education priorities, but that's going to be a main focus early on in the next legislative session. During this interim, legislative leaders and Governor Abbott have also talked about other major issues to address: continued property tax relief, strengthening the power grid, improving health care, increasing housing, supporting law enforcement, making child care more affordable and accessible, enhancing veteran services, improving the state's water supply, and addressing rising homeowners insurance rates. All of those are a tall order for a 140-day session, even when everybody is organized and all on the same page, which is a far cry from where we're going to be starting this legislative session. On the transportation front, I think we have had some consistency in leadership and consistency in vision, as you can see by the earlier presentations, which talked about the great progress that was being made. In the past decade, Texas has experienced incredible growth throughout the state, not just here in the Permian Basin. Between 2010 and 2020, the state welcomed 4 million new residents, pushing the population to over 30 million, and the growth isn't slowing. On average, Texas gains 1,300 people per day, with projections showing the state's population reaching 40 million by 2050. This rapid expansion places significant demands on our transportation system, which plays a critical role in keeping the Texas economy strong by ensuring the movement of goods and people across the state. The Texas Department of Transportation has been proactive in addressing these demands, focusing on safety, innovation, and careful stewardship. With strategic investments and support from the Texas legislature, TxDOT has made unprecedented strides in improving infrastructure, highlighted by the record-setting $12.4 billion in state highway improvement projects awarded in fiscal year 23 and over $13.6 billion in fiscal year 24. This record funding is made possible by two propositions that were approved by the Texas voters, Proposition 1 and Proposition 7. In November 2014, 80% of the Texas voters, which gives you an idea of how much support our population has for transportation-related initiatives, 80% of the Texas voters approved Proposition 1, a constitutional amendment that directs the portion of oil and gas severance revenue to the State Highway Fund under specific conditions. Proposition 1 funds can be used for constructing, maintaining, rehabilitating, and acquiring right-of-way for non-tolled public roadways. TxDOT receives Proposition 1 funds when there is a sufficient balance in the Economic Stabilization Fund, which is also known as our Rainy Day Fund. As of June 2024, the State Highway Fund had accumulated $16.4 billion from Proposition 1 deposits. In 2023, the legislature extended Proposition 1's expiration by 8 years. While the unpredictable nature of oil and gas production tax revenues make it challenging to estimate the Prop 1 fund deposits accurately, the continuation of Prop 1 funding beyond the original expiration provides TxDOT with additional certainty when planning future revenues and subsequently allowing for more consistent planning. Proposition 7 was approved in 2015 by 83% of the Texas voters. Prop 7 uses two key components to increase the State Highway Fund. The first component requires the comptroller to deposit up to $2.5 billion, and we talk about billions and billions of things, so we're talking about real money here. $2.5 billion of the net revenue from state sales and use tax into the State Highway Fund, provided that the sales tax revenue exceeds $28 billion annually. The second component mandates that when the state motor vehicle sales and rental tax revenues surpass $5 billion in a fiscal year, 35% of the new revenue must be transferred to the State Highway Fund. The expiration dates of both components of Prop 7, the sales and use tax, and the motor vehicle sales tax and rental tax revenues were also extended by the legislature last session for 10 years beyond their original expiration date, and which I think is also evidence of the support for transportation-related infrastructure within the legislature itself. In addition to the increased funds from Prop 1 and 7, Texas has received longer-term federal funding through the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that was signed into law in November 21. The federal law provides for 5 years of authorization and funding and expires September 30th, 2026. Federal reimbursements and other federal appropriations for FY26 and FY27 biennium are estimated to be between $6.3 billion and $5.8 billion respectively. Along with these propositions and federal funding, TxDOT has several bond programs that were approved by voters in the early 2000s to increase funding for transportation. The Texas Mobility Fund, the State Highway Revenue Bonds, and General Obligation Funds. TxDOT has obligated and spent all of the State highway revenue and general obligation bond proceeds on transportation projects. TxDOT has the authority to issue up to $3.6 billion in bonds under the Texas Mobility Fund up until 2027, but the issuance of that amount will be determined based upon market conditions. Currently, $2 billion is estimated for projects for the upcoming FY25, FY2034 Unified Transportation Program. So, despite the record-setting funding for transportation projects that these propositions and bonds and federal funding have all generated to meet the growing demands of our growing state, TxDOT has testified before the legislature that it needs roughly twice the amount it is spending to keep up. Let's let that sink in. After all the money that we just talked about is coming in and the increases, things, TxDOT estimates you need twice the amount in order just to keep up. In addition to population growth and demand, the agency faces additional challenges such as inflation, rising construction costs, and supply chain disruptions. In fact, the Highway Cost Index, which tracks the cost of highway construction nationwide, shows a 61% increase in cost from May 2020 to May 2024. I expect transportation officials and supporters to continue to beat the drum for additional transportation funding, but unfortunately, I don't anticipate any additional funding mechanisms being approved during the upcoming legislative session. Propositions 1 and 7 are still fresh in many legislators' mind, and the prospect of needing billions more is incomprehensible to them at this point. So with all those numbers and funding, how does the state policy coming out of Austin affect your road safety here in the Permian Basin? Along with this discussion of funding, I want to highlight TxDOT's Permian Promise. This program was developed in the 2020 Unified Transportation Program by committing $600 million to strategic priority funding to help address the transportation needs throughout the Permian Basin. The goal of the Permian Promise is to identify roadway enhancements that reduce congestion and fatal crashes by improving existing corridors and identifying corridors in need of possible expansions. Talked about some of those earlier today. TxDOT is committed to improving roads and highways by expanding capacity and adding safety features for residential and commercial traffic. Besides funding, automated vehicles are sure to be a topic of discussion during this next legislative session. Both the House and Senate Transportation Committees have discussed the issue during interim hearings. You may be aware that Kodiak has partnered with Atlas and is running automated vehicles here in the Permian. Their representatives testified that the Permian is ideal for autonomous vehicles because it has a significant shortage of trained, experienced, and safe drivers. Traffic is limited on private leased roads, and the speed is limited to about 12 miles per hour on these private roads. Automated vehicle companies tout their safety for their vehicles and report few at-fault accidents. There are few protocols or standards in law for these automated vehicles, and I expect that to be a discussion during the legislative session. Of course, all of the above is based upon the current leadership in the House and the Senate and the committee chairs. New leadership in either chamber can change the direction and outlook for transportation dramatically. Part of the good news for the Permian Road Safety Coalition and you, its supporters, is safety is the top priority for TxDOT and both the House and Senate Transportation Committees. Since the coalition started with a steering committee of volunteer stakeholders in 2015, PRSC has grown into a trusted source of community input and organization for road safety initiatives in the Permian Basin. It's been a pleasure seeing PRSC's regional and data-driven approach be understood and embraced in Austin. Your PRSC leaders have worked with TxDOT to prioritize infrastructure improvement and help secure additional funding for roads in Texas. Not only does PRSC have a seat at that table, at events like today's luncheon, PRSC is actually providing the table for local leaders, industry stakeholders, and state officials to come together and discuss and improve road safety. For those of you who would like to follow along more about what's going on in the legislature session for yourself, or if you want to reach out to us, you can use that QR code there to go to our website and get additional information. It'll also have our contact information there. We'd be happy to answer follow-up questions with you. We think it's our civic responsibility to help folks engage in the legislature. So if you have questions in regards to it, we are happy to assist. and we're incredibly pleased to be here representing the Permian Road Safety Coalition. And I would say I'm happy to answer some questions, to the best of my ability. Don't forget to vote, and look forward to visiting with you all before we leave today.
Chris Britton, thank you very much. Questions for the expert? You know, he laid out the streams of funding, kind of not only the regional, but also sort of the statewide political outlook that can affect that funding, obviously. It's something that we pay very close attention to at the PRSC, because we know to bring all the roads up to standard and to make things as safe as they need to be, it's going to take a lot of money. Any questions for Chris? Yes.
It's not really a question, but I know some of it gets so confusing with politics, and there's voter guides online that are really good that tell you what each candidate stands for.
Yeah. Thank you, Dottie, and thank you for helping us with the display outside.
That is an excellent point, too, in regards to casting your vote. There are a lot of resources out there to be able to take a look at. You do your research and things and cast an informed ballot when you do vote.
Chris, I do have a question while others are thinking, and that is the role that companies that are a part of the Permian Road Safety Coalition, the role that they can play in Austin as well. I know some of the larger ones have government relations, advocates that work directly for the companies, but some of the smaller ones might not. How can they also have a voice?
Well, one of the things that is unique and special about Texas is that we have a citizen legislature. So they come to Austin for 6 months out of every 2 years to consider legislation. But they live in communities all over this state for the other 18 months. And so while, you may not have a dedicated government affairs staff in Austin, you are seeing these folks in the grocery store. You're seeing them on the soccer fields, at the high school events, things, and your input to them as citizens and constituents is actually so much more important than and credible than what they hear in Austin. And so I would just kind of challenge each of us to go back and kind of survey, when you've run across your state representative, your state senator, I can guarantee you have either a first-degree relationship with them or a second-degree relationship with them that can be leveraged to emphasize the importance of road safety initiatives in Austin.
Any other questions for Chris? Anything else?
Y'all are letting me off easy.
Thank you, Chris Britton.
Right.
We appreciate you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike.